for our community conversation on this Wednesday, October the 11th. And by popular request, we're going to speak about the concept of surrender today, and we'll just see where this takes us. I am very grateful that so many of you shared your thoughts about what we ought to speak about. And this topic came up fairly consistently and with some different angles about what it means. So I want to begin by asking you the not so rhetorical question. What do you think of when you hear the word surrender? As opposed, let's just start right there. When you hear the word surrender, what does that mean to you? What does that sound like to you? And just unmute yourselves and tell us what you think.
Give up everything.
What is that?
Give up everything.
Give up everything. Wow, that's a pretty major league surrender. Thank you, Sri Radha. What else?
It has many meanings for me. One of them that I am fond of is going over to the winning side.
Going over to the winning side. That's an interesting take. Yeah, okay. All right, thank you. I'm going to think more about that. Go ahead, Glenna.
Let go.
Letting go. All right. Letting go of anything in particular? I mean, Sri Radha is talking about letting go of everything, but I'm wondering if there's anything in particular.
I don't think of it quite so global. I think of it more probably in more specific situations as opposed to letting go or surrendering to everything.
Okay, so letting go selectively according to what a particular situation requires, perhaps. Okay, all right, great, thank you. All right, other thoughts on this idea of what we mean when we hear surrender?
I would say for me, letting go of control or of thinking I can control every situation or the need to control certain situations.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Acceptance, accepting things for what they are, regardless as to what type of personal implications there may be regarding that, just accepting what is currently.
Yeah, accepting reality as opposed to the way we wish things were. Yeah, I find that particularly challenging. All right, good. Michelle, thank you. And Krista, thank you. Any other thoughts about what you think of when you hear this word?
I get a sense of being fully present in the moment without any other intrusions, something along those lines.
All right, so that's an interesting way to think about it. Surrendering to being present in a particular moment. I think that kind of relates to what Michelle was saying about accepting reality, because oftentimes our minds wander to worrying about or thinking about the future or dwelling on the past, as opposed to being in the present moment. So letting go of that tendency to future surf or dwell in the past. That's an interesting way of thinking about surrender. Thank you, Matthew. Jill, go ahead.
I love all of these answers, but I like to add one more. I like to think about it as submitting I think it goes hand in hand with acceptance, right? But from the yogic perspective, where we're going to head today, I'd like to think about it as submitting to something more than what it is that I have planned for me.
Yeah, okay, thank you. So this, Jill, you're pointing out an interesting thing about the kinds of answers that we're hearing. One kind of answer that I think we're hearing is that there's a passive kind of surrender, a letting go kind of surrender, an acceptance kind of surrender. And then there's an active kind of surrender, moving over to the winning side or submission to X. And that brings us to the next question that I actually wanted to throw out to you is who or what are we supposed to surrender to? When I asked this, when I just asked you all for topics that you wanted to speak about, some of the things that I heard from you was the idea about surrendering to love without control, which applies to parental love. And I assume, or at least as I recall, it's particularly applicable for parental control when our children become teenagers. And that control that we used to be able to exercise starts to slip away. The surrender to attachment to results, surrender to life the way it is. Some of these things that you're sharing now have, come up before. So let's explore this part of the question. Who or what are we supposed to surrender to when we hear the word surrender used in the context of yoga philosophy? Thoughts on that?
This question takes me to the 15th chapter of the Gita, text 3-4, I think, where it speaks about the weapon of detachment. Where we are asked to, with the use of the weapon of detachment, to be able to sever ourselves from the modes of material nature of the material world. And then, once we've done so, to seek the place and surrender to the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And that is all wonderful and beautiful. But what does that really mean for us in our earthly form? For me, it means to listen to Paramatma. It means to accept that the world that I'm living in day to day is the divine creation exactly as it is. And to be able to constantly keep a consciousness where Krishna is prevalent.
All right, Ananda, thank you. I'm going to unpack that a little bit for everyone. So this verse in the 15th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita it speaks about there's a metaphor of the material world as a banyan tree with its roots upward, branches downward, and it's a metaphor for the material world in a couple of different ways. The main way is that it's impossible to find your way around this tree to figure out where it begins, where it ends. But one can cut through the entanglement of material life with the weapon of detachment. And I want to come back to this idea of the relationship between surrender and detachment, because there's the detaching from the material world and the attaching or surrender to the supreme person who is understood to be the origin of everything and the maintainer of everything. And the phrase Paramatma, listening to Paramatma, refers to the localized aspect of that supreme being within the heart of all beings. Forgive me for having just now remembered to open up the chat window. So let me go ahead and share what we've got in the chat window. Ron suggests that surrender means just let go. Sarah, being humble or taking a humble position. Sri Radha, just the first thing that comes to mind. Not that, not that I agree. Oh yeah, surrendering everything. Yeah, not the easiest thing to do. Hands where I can see them. Michelle, I'm going to ask you to elaborate on that in just a moment. Calmly accepting what is, working within the parameters that we have. From Marjorie, thank you. Marty, letting go of outcomes. Jennifer, I work in a 12-step program. Surrender is the bones of my daily practice, giving my experience over to how I am best used by a higher power. And Jill puts in same here, Jennifer, Ishvara. So this corresponds to what we just heard in this verse from the Bhagavad Gita. Ishvara, we hear as a non-sectarian philosophical term for God, for the supreme being in the Yoga Sutras. And the word Ishvara also shows up as part of compound words in the Bhagavad Gita, when Krishna says, I am the Lord of all beings, and such like that. So let's go on. So now we have this idea of surrendering to the personality of Godhead, from whom everything began and from whom everything has extended since time immemorial. How do you all feel about that idea of, like, that's how, that's who we're surrendering to, a supreme source of everything, the beginningless, endless being from whom the world comes and in whom the world ultimately is resolved. Any thoughts about that? Henry, go ahead.
First, I want to thank Jill for her comments. That brings me back to the Yoga Sutras, and the Yoga Sutras, I looked it up, 123 talks about the chittas can be quieted when we engage in meditation and surrender completely to Ishvara Pranadhana, or what do I think about it? Do we have any choice? So can I fight all that is, or do I accept it? And for me, if I accept things as they are, life goes a little more easy. And I like the easier, softer way.
Okay. Lulu, go ahead.
Sometimes, or to me right away, that sounds like when I give up control, that I just become a puppet. Like, what's the point here if I'm just being used by another power?
Okay, so surrender to divine will means becoming a puppet, letting go of one's own sense of agency to become an instrument of someone else's agency. That, I would think, would require a very high degree of trust in the puppeteer, in the intentions of the puppeteer for us, and for what purpose that would serve, or what meaning that would give to our own lives. It's a really interesting point My Parama Guru, Srila Prabhupada, wrote a poem when he came to America to teach. And I'll paraphrase it a little bit. He said, I don't know exactly what I'm doing here or what I'm going to do. I don't know how I will. He's now speaking, the poem is a prayer to Krishna, his Ishta Devata, his worshipable deity. And he's praying, I really don't know how I am going to accomplish my mission here. But if you like, you can make my words such that they will be comprehensible to the people in this foreign land, even though I am not expert in their language. So now I am a puppet in your hands, and you can make me dance as you like. So this was his mood of full surrender. He had complete confidence that he could allow himself to be made a puppet by the Supreme Person. And his conception of the Supreme Person was such that he had not only did he have no fear of being an instrument of divine will as he understood it, but the idea that he would become a puppet of divine will was part of what made him fearless. On his own, he didn't feel capable, but giving himself over to the supreme puppeteer, he felt that that would empower him to achieve his goal, which was to serve the mission of his own guru. Anyway, there's some thoughts about that inspired me based on what you said. So thank you for offering that. Michelle and then Matthew.
I think it's comforting to like know that I'm not the end all be all of things, and you know there's a lot of control that I have to maintain in like my material existence. So on the opposite end of that, I feel at peace knowing that there is more than just me.
All right, thank you. Yeah, I think I also find some reassurance in that. Yeah. Matthew, go ahead.
If I'm being honest, I would say my initial reaction to your question was feeling a little bit uncomfortable. And I do, oh boy, my dog is playing with the toy. I feel like I'm comfortable with the idea of that, but maybe not those words. And like the more I read about it, the more I might not use those same kind of words, and whether or not they're correct or not, the phrase that has resonated more with me comes from a Buddhist monk, so it's more like a Buddhist interpretation of the Yoga Sutras. But this idea of shifting from a self-centered point of view to a nature-centered point of view. So it's this sense that there is, like, we're all part of nature, and I don't know if it's the same sort of nature as like Prakriti or whatever we're talking about, the technical terms here. But for me, this idea of like shifting from being really focused on myself to recognizing I'm part of a much bigger thing is comforting when I think about it in sort of different words, which to me sound similar to how other people might talk about surrendering to Ishvara as an all-creator God.
Right. Yeah. So there's two things here. Matthew, I think what you said just kind of relates to what Michelle was saying a moment ago. In the devotional aspect of yoga philosophy, Surrender, in one sense, means taking ourselves out of the center, thinking that everything revolves around us, that, you know, that we're the end all and be all of everything that we should do and say and think, and taking ourselves out of the center and putting ourselves in a position where we are revolving around the actual center, which again now relates to the idea of surrender means acknowledging reality rather than thinking about the way we would prefer things to be or wish things were. So just starting out with the idea that there is something bigger than us, and we are meant to revolve around that which is greater than us, rather than having or trying to get the world to revolve around us. And there's a portion of the Srimad Bhagavatam, the Bhagavad Purana. There's a chapter in one of the early cantos called the first steps in God realization, and it begins with associating material nature with the supreme divinity. So what you were speaking about in terms of being kind of nature oriented, that even is in devotional yoga as well as in the Buddhist idea. This first step of taking ourselves out of the center is or involves seeing the natural world as divine and seeing ourselves as part of that natural world, which shrinks us down to a realistic size, as opposed to the size that our ego would like to think we are. Anyway, so yeah, that's what you made me think of when you brought that up, the idea of being nature oriented. Thank you. All right, other thoughts? Ananda, go ahead. Oh, by the way, Matthew, if your dog is anxious to play, then maybe your dog should meet Marjorie's dog, and they can play together.
And my dog.
Oh, and Ananda's dog. All right, we're gonna have like virtual dog play. Okay, Jill's dog also wants to join in. All right, so any of you who have dogs, we're gonna have like a virtual like dog park for everybody, so that during this hour they can all play together. Ananda, go ahead.
Sure. So I was thinking, I remember when I look back on this spiritual journey about the concept of surrender, and I remember, okay, I can give up all the things that happen, all the circumstance, the bad things that I can let go of and attribute to the way things are. Where I really struggled was in the concept of, speaking of dogs, I have a puppy, pardon the noise. Where I really struggled was in the concept of interpersonal relationships and the attachments thereof. When you think about things in terms of, for example, children, my role as mother. Mm-hmm. It's the most important job to date that I had on this earth and during this lifetime. Mm-hmm. And then to really begin to understand that part of my identity is one that is, of course, biologically ingrained, but also socially and culturally ingrained deeply into who I think I am. Mm-hmm. And being able to understand that even my own children don't actually belong to me, that those individual souls, my partner's soul, anybody that I'm intimately related with or connected to, they aren't mine. And that I struggled in that area of understanding for a very long time. And being able to surrender the concepts of that deep, and not to diminish the nature of those very deep and personal relationships, but ultimately, they are Krishna's children. They are not mine. I don't own them. They don't own me. And what their service is here on this planet is for them to figure out. And my role now as a devotee is to hopefully guide them in ways that are conducive for their own understanding of the presence of Paramatma within them. And beyond that, I can cook them a mighty fine meal still and gather at the holiday tables. But I just wanted to share that was a really challenging aspect for my growth and journey. I don't know if anybody else had experienced that.
I can assure you that there are others here who are finding themselves dealing with a similar challenge. And before we're done here today, I'm going to come back to this very issue. But the idea of surrendering conceptions of who we are in relationship to others that are biologically and socially imposed on us is, I think, one of the most challenging aspects of the idea of surrender. So Ananda, thank you very much for sharing. I hope others will comment on what you shared. Meanwhile, Marty and then Jill.
I don't know if this is sort of tangential to that maybe, but I was just thinking about how I feel like surrender is difficult when I'm conflating like material experiences I have with the spiritual, like when I realize that like my mistrust of Krishna is actually coming from a mistrust that maybe originated like with a relationship that I had with a material relationship that I had with a person.
Mm-hmm.
And then the more that I bring awareness to those things, the more I'm able to see, like, it feels like it opens up space for Krishna. Like, I'm like, oh, maybe that's not, that's not, or I don't know if that makes sense, but yeah, it helps me to surrender. But I feel like I almost like, I know I catch myself like on these sort of like footholds or so these little, I don't know, like something will catch me and I'll realize like I'm holding back because, but it has a lot more to do with my material experience.
Yeah, just for your sake of your reassurance, that does make total sense. Bhakti yoga is the yoga of relationships. And there's an emphasis on this idea that we can have spiritual relationships, the primary spiritual relationship being between us and the source of our being, the one being who is the sum total of all being and all beings. And there's this idea that we are an integral part of a complete whole, and that complete whole has the aspect of personality, of personness, and therefore the emphasis is on the relationship between the infinitesimal part and the infinite complete whole. And one of the practical connections between spiritual experience and material experience is that our relationships here in the material world can be ways to practice having that ultimate relationship. You know, if we see the person we're in relationship with as a spiritual being rather than a material being, also connected to that supreme ultimate source of being. That spiritualizes the relationship. However, not all relationships in the material world go all that smoothly. And when things go wrong, we think, well, that's just the nature of relationships, and therefore a spiritual relationship will be kind of the same as material relationships, or the spiritual relationship we have with the complete whole, with the personality of Godhead, another way to put it, can also be fraught with these same kinds of difficulties or misunderstandings or other things. So relationships are tricky, they're hard. They demand things from us that are not always easy to give. Surrendering to the idea that relationships are inevitable can be difficult when we have difficulty with relationships. So navigating that space between material relationship and spiritual relationship can be challenging. Marty, thank you very much for sharing that. All right, Jill, go ahead.
So I'm really appreciating this dialogue today. I have a couple of thoughts, but to start with Ananda, as a mother of 4, I too am literally this week just starting to understand the difference between ownership and stewardship of my children. And it's been an eye-opener to kind of be ever more aware that they're not mine, that there's a plan for them, and I could very well be a stumbling block to them. But the comment I wanted to share before that was about this idea of being a puppet, because I definitely have felt in my life that there was a time where I would have thought of it as a puppet. And so when the comment was made, I really could identify with that. But almost immediately in my mind came this idea that really we can like be the hands and feet of God. So rather than being driven like a puppet to do his will, without our submission to that, when we choose to be God's hands and feet, then it gives us the choice to do his will. And I think that that's where the real aspect of surrender and submission comes in for me.
Yeah, this is thinking about surrender in an active way, insofar as it's a choice. Our agency, our free will is in play by making a choice to become an instrument, as opposed to the idea that we would become an unwilling instrument, that we're forced to surrender rather than we voluntarily surrender. It's a really good point. And I think it speaks to the fear that people have of surrender, thinking that it's involuntary, or that we'll be taken advantage of, or that we will be obliged to act in ways we would choose not to, that sort of thing. Yeah, thank you very much for speaking to the idea from that angle. Glenna, go ahead.
Well, I have kind of 2 things I want to say. One is in relation to ownership versus stewardship. And I know that was spoken of in the context of children, but I think of it in a larger context too, because I think of it as far as our own relationships to really pretty much everything that exists, including animals in the planet, that the tendency to overuse and waste and cause harm to animals in the planet from a I own, I can do whatever I want because I'm a person versus a four-legged creature. So that's one area that, I wanted to expand the conversation about.
Oh no, that was a unfortunate bit of timing for the internet to kick Glenna off the line here. Hopefully she will come back to be able to finish sharing her thoughts with us. And no, that's Carla coming in. All right, so hopefully we'll hear Glenna be able to finish her thought momentarily when she gets back on. Meanwhile, Henry, go ahead. Unmute yourself, please.
Thank you. I'm glad the concept of will came up in the concept of surrender. One of the sort of guiding sayings that's influenced me over the years is it comes out of an 18th century American, a freed slave. And on his tombstone, and I'll send you a copy of the tombstone, and you can share it if you like, he writes, "God wills us free, man wills us slaves. God's will be done." An older English version of it said, God wills us free, man wills us slave. I will as God wills, God's will be done. So my agency is to choose to do God's will. And as someone just said, I love the comment about being the hands and feet of God. There was a wonderful cartoon, Family Circus, this past Sunday, where little Dorothy, the little girl's saying, going around hugging people because that's her. She's God's hugger.
That's a nice designation to have.
Yeah. All right.
Yeah, I think one of the reasons we resist the idea of surrender to God's will is because we're afraid God might act like people. And surrendering to people often is a really dangerous idea, or we are obliged to do it unwillingly. So we resist not only the idea of surrender to divinity, but also resist the idea that divinity must be a person or have that attribute of being a person, because our experience of people is not always so great. Anyway, Henry, thank you for sharing. Glenna, welcome back. The internet decided to interrupt you. Please continue and finish your thought.
Yeah, somebody didn't like something I was saying, I think. So
perhaps.
Actually, my computer ran out of charge and did not notify me ahead of time. So the second thing I was wanting to mention was when you were asking about our reaction about surrendering to higher power or the supreme being, I just wanted to say that I've had a lot of issue since the beginning of starting to study the Gita. And it's because it triggers in me a lot of kind of energy I have around the concept of God and the concept of religion from an organized religion standpoint, because my own perception and experience is there's a lot of harm that has been caused to varieties of people, groups of people, women in particular, other groups as well. So this has been a journey for me, trying to be able to surrender and let go of all of that, to be able to be more open to the idea of kind of the divine and what that means to me. And it doesn't mean God, and it doesn't mean a patriarchal kind of being. But I still struggle with this to some extent, just because I have a lot, I have a lot of feeling, and it's not so much from my personal experience, it's just more what I observe in the world and, the damage that I see being done. So So, I've come to an okay place with Krishna at this point. But I think it's, I see the Gita more in terms of a metaphor. I, like Matthew, have a more comfort level with more looking at things from a nature standpoint. And I have no problem seeing myself as being just part of the collective, and what I do in my part of it matters to everybody in that collective. And my own freedom is tied to everybody else's. I have no problem with all of that. But when it starts smacking of God, all my little antenna react. And so, this is still part of my journey that I'm trying to reconcile.
I think that there are plenty of people who share that element in their spiritual journey, that we have a conception of God, and our conception of God determines our faith or lack of or absence of in a supreme being. And in yoga philosophy in general, and in bhakti yoga philosophy as we hear it in books like the Bhagavad Gita and the Srimad Bhagavatam, the concept of the absolute truth is very different from the concept of God. And that's for those of you who have taken note of the Srimad Bhagavatam, introduction to Srimad Bhagavatam, I'm going to start offering in a couple of weeks. We're going to really talk a lot about that, because that's where the Bhagavad Purana, the Srimad Bhagavatam, begins with this definition of the absolute truth, and how and its distinction from the concept of God, and particularly the concept of God that we get from the monotheistic religions that originate in the Middle East, that have kind of given us a kind of baked in conception of God for those of us here in the West who grew up in the Western monotheistic traditions. When we look back to the Middle East, and when we look right now, wow, do we ever see the kind of horror, not just damage, but horror that Glenn is referring to. And we all have that experience of associating, or at least many of us, I think, have that experience of associating the Western monotheistic tradition with everything that's wrong with religion and what it leads to. And letting go of that conception of a supreme being in order to feel comfortable surrendering to a supreme being is a very, very challenging thing for anybody who was brought up surrounded by or within Western monotheistic conceptions of the creator God. So I'm certain that you have plenty of company, Glenna, insofar as this particular challenge on your spiritual journey is concerned. How to reconcile this idea of the theistic aspect of yoga philosophy with our experience of Western theology. And I'm going to say a little bit more about hearing some different points of views on this before we close out, because I'm participating in something that Jill is the originator of this Saturday, that I expect will speak to this issue. And somebody had their hand up. Shayna, you're not going to get away. Did you get, there you are. Okay. Yeah. You had your hand up, too late. And it's so nice to see you. Thank you for being here.
Nice to see you too. I'm sorry I was late and I have to leave in just a few minutes, although I think this ends in a few minutes. So I'm going to be that person and ask a question that may be completely extraneous. So just,
We'll roll with it.
Okay. Or just shut it down. My question, that is. How does what I was thinking of, maybe just because it's sort of where I'm at, and I've been thinking about like searching for like a teacher, possibly even a guru? Like, how does that complicate this question of surrender? And I do think that what you just talked about like people's concepts of God or the divinity and how sort of warped they can be. And I think that seeking out a teacher can either help or make that worse, you know, and there is, you know, my understanding in this tradition is there is an emphasis on finding a guru and surrendering to that person as well. And I know that that can be really problematic and complicated also. And like, these are just things I'm thinking about in my life lately, because I am looking for a teacher. So I wonder if you could speak to that a little bit, if it relates. If it doesn't, just
it totally relates. It's actually really important. Shana, thank you for bringing this up. You know, up to this point, we've been speaking about one of the aspects of surrender being surrender to Ishvara or the supreme being, or whatever is your conception of a supreme absolute truth, totality. But who's the representative of that? Who is a genuine authority on the topic of how you constructively surrender to the supreme, whatever your conception of a supreme absolute is? In the yoga tradition, that's one of the roles of the guru, is to be that person, the transparent via medium to the highest truth. And our experience, once again, of relationships where there is an imbalance of power is not always great. It does not always encourage surrender. There is advice in the Bhagavad Gita. If you want to understand how sacrifices work in order to elevate your consciousness and purify your heart, you find someone who has seen the truth, a seer of the truth, and then you surrender to that person. You offer them service, you hear receptively from them, etc. Well, that means that person has to be really qualified, and you have to know what their qualifications are, or should be, and then see if they meet that qualification. That's one of Arjuna's very first questions in the Bhagavad Gita, is how do I recognize someone who is at this level of spiritual understanding that you're describing? So Krishna responds by giving a whole long list of attributes of someone who is the real deal, someone you can actually trust to give yourself over to as a student. But, you know, even then, you know, we have to develop a relationship of trust. It can't just be, you know, you just throw yourself all in and do whatever someone tells you without understanding the epistemology of yoga, which is, if the guru says something, they have to back it up with a scriptural reference. That scriptural reference also has to play out in the example of the lives of previous sadhus, people on the path of yoga. So there's a check and balance there. Then it has to make sense. Logic is the second element of evidence in yoga epistemology. Is it sound? Which means, does it have any circular reasoning, or does it have any internal contradictions? If no, proceed. Is it complete? Can you practically apply it in all relevant circumstances? If yes, then direct perception. That's the third element of evidence. Does it correspond to your lived experience? Or when you do what the guru says, do you get the result that the guru promises? So blind following is never encouraged in a relationship in yoga philosophy. But this idea of surrender to a genuine source of spiritual wisdom, appropriate surrender, I should say, that is there. In this day and age, as probably in every day and age, one should probably proceed with caution in developing a relationship of trust that supports that kind of surrender. So, Sheena, thank you so much. All right. Jill, I'm going to come to you in a second, but Carla threw a few things, or something came up in the chat. Why does one have to surrender? Aren't we the spark of divine? Sorry. That's a really good question. Why is that even a thing, surrender? And Henry offered up an answer to that. It's the use of will, agency, following the will of Ishwara, or my ego will, much, two different results. So Carla, Jill, give me just a second. I'm going to quick answer this and then we're going to proceed. Why do we have to surrender? Because time is a thing, and time will make us surrender everything in due course of time. The question is not whether or not we will surrender. The question is, what will we surrender to? Or who will we surrender to? We can resist the idea of surrendering and then eventually surrender to time. Or we can ask ourselves the question, where does time come from? Who created that, along with everything else that time affects? Surrender will happen one way or another, at one time or another. It's just a case of using our free will, our agency, to decide, will I surrender to time? Will I surrender to my mind and senses, which make all these demands of me? Will I surrender to this or that impulse? Or is there something higher that I can be of service to? Is there a purpose my life can serve, and can I surrender to that higher calling? So that's what I think of insofar as, okay, all right, well, at least if what I said is good enough for you to think about, then I'll gladly take that. Thank you for your question. That was a really good question. Okay, Jill, sorry to keep you waiting. Go ahead.
That's okay. So to back up to what we were previously talking about, doesn't Krishna say in the Gita that something to the aspect that one needs to reject all religion, or put it off, because he's not, if I understand it correctly, he's not looking for religion, to surrender to a religion, any of them, but to seek in that surrender a relationship between inviting direct relationship and moving forward in somewhat of a God union together, rather than submitting to religion. It says it, I think, twice somewhere in there. You probably have the exact quote.
Sarva dharman parityaja mamikam sharanam vraja aham tvam sarva papebhyo moksha yashyami ma shuchaha. So this is the 66th verse of the 18th chapter of Bhagavad Gita, and one that I know just because I've repeated it so many times in my head. It is often misunderstood as something that encourages us to abandon religion, although what you have said about it is correct. Here, religion means dharma, universal principles of religion, or those principles that bring about the experience of reunion of with the source of our being, which invites that intimate relationship with the source of our being, as opposed to a religion. So, for example, when Krishna says sarva dharman parityaja, abandoning all varieties of religion, is one way this is translated. It doesn't mean that if you're Jewish, stop being Jewish. If you're Muslim, stop being Muslim. If you're Hindu, stop being Hindu. What it means is abandon all lesser principles of religion and just adopt this one overarching ultimate principle of religion, which is surrender or taking shelter of me, the supreme being. And if you do that, then I will protect you from all karmic reactions to anything you may have done in the past. You'll be free from karma by offering yourself to me. And then he gives the guarantee, do not fear, don't worry, don't lament. You have nothing. The Bhagavad Gita begins with Arjuna's lamentation for what's about to happen on the battlefield. And Krishna ends by saying, do not lament. Go forward with the battle as an instrument of divine will. I have my own reasons for this to go on. And you will be an instrument of reestablishing universal principles of religion in society that are universal, meaning they don't depend on any particular form of faith, but rather that all forms of faith find their ultimate resolution in this principle of surrender to ultimate divinity. So, Jill, thank you for your sharing your observation. There are a couple more in the chat, and then we're running out of time, so I'm going to wrap things up quickly. Jennifer offered us, surrender is where the magic happens. I think of it as my tiny human will meeting divine will, like a confluence of rivers. That's a great way to think about it. And then Michelle, we are a spark of the divine, but not as individuals. The entirety of it, for me, surrender means acceptance of this. I am inclined to agree, but that is a very nice way of summarizing the essence of Bhakti Yoga philosophy. And that's all for this time. Thank you all very, very much for being here and for your enthusiastic participation in our conversation. Please email me if you have anything you want to follow up on. And I look forward to seeing you all again soon. Have a wonderful rest of your day.